I grew up indoctrinated as an evangelical Christian, and through a lot of twists and turns, I finally arrived at the awareness that I am, in fact, an atheist. And I want to talk about all of the ways that my life and the quality of my existence has improved as a result. Welcome back to the Kayse Melone Show. My name is Kayse Melone, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for the grace of kind of a wonky setup if this comes out a little bit weird, because I am, in fact, in a hotel room. I traveled to Los Angeles this weekend so that I could participate in a YouTube channel that is not my own as a self-proclaimed atheist. I don't want to give away too much information because it hasn't been published on their end yet, but I'm excited to share with you guys kind of my experience once that material has been published. Nonetheless, I will give you a little bit of background information that I was coming again as an atheist to a debate style kind of show. And through this experience, I have come away kind of like almost solidifying my identification as an atheist because, oh my good goddess. So I kind of wanted to talk about all of the ways that my personal experience as an atheist has increased my overall quality of life, especially in comparison to the evangelical Christian culture that I grew up in. Because a lot of the things that I have heard from Christians, and I heard a lot of them talk about this today, was that the reason that they cling to their faith so intensely has less to do with the cultural result, with the societal manifestation of their belief system. In fact, a lot of Christians would not identify with the dominant Christian nationalist rhetoric kind of being touted by our government here in the United States. And for a lot of Christians, it sounds like their identification has to do more with their personal transformative experiences of Jesus Christ or God, he, him, whatever it may be. And that's what I kind of want to speak to as far as like, okay, well, if that's the basis for your faith, that's great. I don't want to take away anyone's quality of life. But I would like to speak to my personal experience as an atheist being my transformation as a better person, a higher quality of life, etc. So growing up in the Evangelical Christian church, I had a lot of internalized beliefs that I was taught from the get-go. So I went to a Bible-based private high school growing up, affiliated with the megachurch. I attended every week, multiple times a week. I was really in the culture, and this isn't true for everyone raised in that environment, but I very much internally believed all of the dogma that I was being preached to about. I believed everything I was told about the Bible. And I really, again, internalized a lot of those thought processes. And there are a lot of ways that religion can harm the individual adherents. But unfortunately, we don't always see it when we're still in that environment. And it's taken a lot of time and energy for me to really unpack all of the ways that evangelical Christianity held me back. Now, a lot of Christians will hear my story and they'll say, well, that wasn't a true portrayal of Jesus Christ's teachings, or obviously they weren't real Christians. And I understand that the no true Scotsman philosophical argument is really easy to say that they weren't a true Christian. I sometimes even fall into that habit of saying, well, they're not a real atheist, they X, Y, and Z. But at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is the culture that arises from a certain belief system. I kind of want to have some kind of delineation between the cultural experience and the personal experience, because I don't want to negate anyone's personal experience, but at the end of the day, one of the prompts that I talked about today was that, in fact, religion does more harm than good, not just on an organized societal level, but also for the individual adherents of any religion, any organized religion we're really talking about. So my story really comes into play here because I think, again, my personal experience as an atheist has been way better than my personal experience as a Christian, which, interestingly enough, most of my life I was a Christian, right? So I had 2 decades of being able to experience life through the lens of a Christian. And you would think that with more opportunities, more years, more time to manifest a higher quality of life, I would have had that quality of life. But actually, in the last several years, in the past decade or so of me not being a Christian, that's when I really got to a higher quality of life. Now, again, there were some twists and turns, and I do want to be honest about those, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before I get into the ways that my life has gotten better as an atheist, I do want to make a couple of points about definitions here. So when we're talking about deconversion, that's usually kind of like a singular capital M moment. Whenever someone's talking about they left the Christian faith or they walked away, this can look like a myriad of different experiences for people. And I think it's important to remember that there's still like if your capital M moment, your deconversion moment, is the straw that broke the camel's back, there were still a bunch of straws on the camel's back in the first place. There are usually a lot of these stories of deconverting away from a high demand religion or from any religion. There is usually a lot of little things that kind of started building up, but then there was one moment that kind of broke it all down. Then when we talk about deconstruction, I consider that to be more of an ongoing journey, okay? I very often say that deconstruction is a journey, not a destination, because even now, as an adult, there are still many ways that I consistently deconstruct the ideology in which I was raised, not just from a Christian perspective, but also being raised as a Christian nationalist and that conservative political identity, okay? There were white supremacist undertones that I have to constantly check myself and deconstruct. There was a lot of internalized misogyny, okay? Christianity is one of the most patriarchal iterations of any system of belief on this planet. And that's constantly something that I have to internally check and realize that I'm still kind of in this world, specifically influenced by a lot of Christian rhetoric. And so deconstruction is an awareness of constantly looking at a lot of these claims and constantly looking and using our critical thinking to kind of unpack the ways that certain beliefs or ideas or concepts are presented to us, and being able to use our discernment to kind of differentiate the truth from the not so much truth. Another thing I want to talk about before I really dive into all the ways my life has gotten better as an atheist is why I'm doing what I'm doing here. Why am I building this platform and talking about my deconversion moment and deconstruction journey? Well, I think in large part, I'm kind of trying to show up for the version of myself 10 years ago who didn't really have anyone right after she deconverted. There are so many people who are recognizing that the traditional religions of the past are no longer serving us. And this looks like a million different things. It's very personal for people, but there are a lot of people coming to the realization that the religious Christian tradition is simply not serving them anymore, whether it's because culturally it's become more aligned with authoritarianism, or because on a personal level, they just don't want to believe in a fairy tale anymore. So there's all of these people who are coming from similar backgrounds like myself. And unfortunately, what we have been able to witness and study is that when you grow up in such a high demand, high control culture like Evangelical Christianity, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of different iterations of a lot of rules, okay, in the religious system, when we walk away from that, because our upbringing is so deeply intertwined with our personal identity and our value system and the way that we see reality and all of these really big existential questions, whenever we have a deconversion moment and kind of start the process of deconstruction, there is a lot of existential fear that is just right out the gate, just so intense, and it can be incredibly disorienting. And I think that a lot of Christians will look at that and say, well, obviously that's because you've lost your faith, right? There's a lot of, I understand the Christian argument that because right when we leave the Christian faith, life gets really difficult and we don't have direction and it can be tricky to rebuild community, and all of these really real world results of walking away from a faith and kind of like negative aspects from walking away from the faith. The Christian argument is then, well, obviously you have listened to the devil. Obviously you've walked away from God. Of course your life is going to suck. So again, I really wanted to share this aspect of my journey as an atheist because yes, it was really difficult for me in the beginning, but I think it was difficult specifically because we as a society have not really had the opportunity to build a lot of these meaning-based practices and rituals and communities outside of traditional religions, which again, aren't serving anyone anymore. And we're trying to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're trying to rebuild in a secular humanist or a more spiritual, not religious, and all of these different iterations of how can we do this without dogma kind of mentality. I have a lot of hope for the future in this regard, but I do think it is important to recognize, like at first when I walked away and became an atheist, life was harder and it was more difficult. And I just want to be honest and vulnerable about that because I know that there are a lot of people kind of questioning their own faith, and those are the people I'm here for, right? I'm trying to talk about this because I think it is important to recognize the realistic aspect of kind of navigating the void without the tools and practices that we used to rely on in the past. But the reason I have a lot more hope is, as we'll talk about, there are a lot of ways that we can still find meaning and purpose and value and morality and community and all of these things outside of religion. And I wish someone had told me these things. I wish someone had been able to kind of point to different tools and resources and concepts and philosophical ways to express those existential, like, big questions without relying on, again, a truth claim, a dogma that is so externalized and so patriarchal that it's asinine, honestly. So now let's get into all of the ways that my life has gotten so much better as an atheist. No regrets, will never go back. I had multiple people proselytize to me today, and I can attest that there's just nothing. There's nothing that can bring me back to Christianity, specifically any belief system with a he, hims, pronouns deity. Miss me with that, goodbye. So the first way that my life got so much better now that I'm an atheist is that I have so much appreciation for my skeptical nature and my critical thinking, which I did not have as a Christian, period. What's interesting here is I've brought this up to Christians before, and a lot of them will retort back and they'll say, well, I struggle with doubt all of the time, but I have faith, and so that's why I can still call myself a Christian. And there's all different ways that my Christianity can be tested. But again, because I have faith, those doubts end up kind of washing away. But then, of course, they'll arise again. And it's just a constant journey of me rediscovering my faith over and over again. And I think what's really more meaningful for me as an atheist, my differentiation from that is like, yes, I also constantly have doubts. I also constantly question any claims that come my way. The difference here is that I'm not returning back to the original claim that I had a doubt about in the first place for the sake of returning to it. Faith described by the Christian scripture is that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. I don't operate like that anymore. I don't need to understand all of the scientific background about the theory of relativity and why gravity exists, Newtonian or Einstein's version, whatever. I have a lot of empirical evidence that I'm going to stay seated in this chair because I'm sitting on it, right? Like, that is not an evidence of things not seen kind of argument. However, when somebody starts making truth claims about something that maybe I don't have enough evidence for yet, or maybe it was their personal subjective experience, all of these other kinds of claims, I have room for the openness to consider them, but I also really appreciate the critical thinking I have grown outside of religion that doesn't automatically bring me back to, well, I always have to come back to the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, okay? I can trust my interpreting spirit of curiosity and inquisitive nature to either let go of, I'm actually not going to be an expert on astrophysics, so I don't need to understand all of the minutiae of this, but I can trust the experts who have done the research and say X, Y, and Z, right? And to me, that is so different than trusting a pastor to interpret the Bible about why the universe works the way it does. There is no actual credible evidence for a lot of the biblical interpretations that pastors preach, okay? And so there's just not as much cognitive dissonance internally because I'm able to have this simultaneously skeptical and open mind. The path of deconstruction by nature also, when combined with kind of this postmodernist aspect, can result in deconstruction all of the way down. And I talk about this a lot in relation to these four main hierarchies that I think it's important for all of us to at least imagine deconstructing, even if we're not ready for it. But it's white supremacy, patriarchy, organized religion, and capitalism. These are all very powerful hierarchies within our society. And to me, when I started my religious deconstruction after my deconversion moment, I actually started to realize there's actually multiple systems of power constantly bombarding my every thought and behavior and belief, trying to keep me controlled, complacent, and compliant. And to me, deconstruction all the way down means whenever I take all of that internalized misogyny out, whenever I take that white supremacist indoctrination out, whenever I take out the falsehoods about capitalism versus socialism, whenever I get to the root of all of that, deep down, we can find the innermost part of our identity as actually non-existent. Whenever we deconstruct enough, we find that even our names are constructed. And so from that point of nothing is actually built into our identity, this is what I was talking about earlier, it can bring up a lot of existential anxiety when we don't have the tools and the practices to help us navigate it in a healthy way. But I will say that once we get to that point and we have some tools and practices, this is like one of the reasons I do what I do, right? Because I had to discover a lot of this on my own. And it is a personal journey that we all have to do on our own to an extent. But now there are incredible resources out there. Britt Hartley from No Nonsense Spirituality is one that I highly recommend. She is a self-proclaimed spiritual atheist, and she talks about her shtick is navigating the void with all of the tools, none of the dogma, etc. So I highly recommend her for actual resources in that regard. But my point is, there are a lot of tools and resources out there that I kind of wish I had 10 years ago, but it is what it is. I'm sure there were iterations of it, but I just was not kind of connected to them. I think what's important to me is recognizing that when we realize that everything around us is in fact socially constructed, is in fact constructed, we have a lot better internal lens of critical thinking to then apply outwards with that awareness that everything is constructed. I just personally have found that awareness a lot more freeing than the concept that life was designed and it was this top-down experience that I may or may not be correctly aligned with, and I have to be this way and I have to be this way. It's like, whoa. Actually, it's not an up to down kind of construction or design, right? It's not a top to bottom, God to human kind of design or divine plan, etc. It's an internal and then outward construction horizontally manifested through all of us. And I think that's really, really important. And that has brought a lot more, I think, intellectual prowess on my part. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Another way that my life has gotten so much better as an atheist is I am considerably more compassionate. I can talk to anyone now. I can talk to Christians. I can talk to anyone of any denomination, any faith, and I can immediately stand on our shared humanity. That is the foundation from which I am operating, period. When I was a Christian, I could not talk to people who were not Christians without that little bug in the back of my mind of it's my job to convert them. Without that little voice in the back of my head telling me that, well, they're not good enough, or they're going to hell. There's a lot of really kind of, I don't want to say hateful, because Christians will turn off and say, no, it's all love, it's all love. There's a very real us versus them mentality built into the nature of dogmatic religions such as Christianity, built into the nature of a belief system that shuffles people into heaven or hell, or into righteous and non, good and evil. Human nature is not that simple. I'm not trying to be the bearer of bad news. I don't think it's bad news. I think there's a lot more nuance to the conversation of morality than just God said so, as evidenced by all of the different denominations within Christianity interpreting the Bible in their own way and manifesting whatever kind of cultural norms for morality are realistic for the time and place in which they're living. But my point is, I have so much more compassion for absolutely everyone now. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I just did not have it when I was a Christian. I just did not. One of the reasons I think I'm more compassionate now is because I'm not trying to easily explain away the problem of suffering. Epicurus talks about how if there is a God, the God cannot be all good and all powerful. Either he, right, him, is all powerful but not good, and that's why he doesn't step in to alleviate the suffering of the world, or God is not powerful, but is all good and doesn't have the ability to step in and alleviate the suffering. There's also the expansion of God cannot be all knowing, all good, and all powerful. There's a lot of ways to kind of philosophically negate the concept that God is all knowing, all powerful, and all good. Okay. I'm not going to get into that right now, but my point is, I'm not really out here trying to convince anyone of why suffering exists anymore. And I think that's the more compassionate stance to take than trying to explain why suffering exists, period. I think it's totally natural for humans to use storytelling to explain the complexities of life. We've done it forever. I think storytelling can be a beautiful kind of almost archetypal way of processing a lot of the real trauma we have just being alive and going through suffering ourselves. And I don't want to speak ill of anyone who actively uses storytelling for the sake of bringing peace to themselves and others. However, when we start to make claims about the validity of those stories as if they are one and done, there's no other interpretation that could possibly bring you peace and fulfillment, there's no other explanation for suffering, that's when I start to have issue. Because I think a lot of people will go straight to, well, children with cancer, right? I think that we're totally missing the mark in the conversation about the problem of suffering, because it's very easy to try and just say, well, suffering exists according to the Christian argument because sin entered the world through Eve. I just find that so disrespectful to the parents and the families of people going through any kind of suffering. You're gonna look them in the eye and say, well, someone ate an apple 6,000 years ago. That's why this is happening to you. I find that incredibly inconsiderate. I find it inappropriate. And I think it's just disrespectful to the nature of suffering. Now that I'm an atheist, I don't really need to explain it away. Essentially because I'm not making the extraordinary claim that a creator being is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, right? I'm not making that kind of claim. I'm out here now kind of just living in the, okay, suffering exists. What do we do? How can we help, right? I go straight to that. I think it can be interesting to kind of navigate the intellectual discussion about whether or not suffering has a purpose and all of that, but it is not my starting place to simply explain it away. I think that's a really critical point that does not allow for a compassion first, a people first approach from the point of Christianity, because I can promise you I never thought about the victims of suffering first whenever I was a Christian. And of course, a lot of Christians are very compassionate people and very, grounded in their own sense of morality. And I don't want to speak ill of them as individuals, but if we're talking about Christianity and the culture that it breeds, at the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of individuals who might be really good people getting together and saying this is the right way, this is the only way, does result in a lot of these spiritual bypassing of morality and suffering and concepts that I just don't think are that easily explained just because you guys all want it to be so true, your personal experience. I just think a lot of the conversation around the problem of suffering is a little bit disrespectful in that regard. I think another way that I have more compassion now as an atheist is because I almost do have this sense of a determinist universe, because, I consider myself a spiritual atheist, so I don't think it's as easy to say as we're just molecules and chemicals and all of that. I have a little bit more nuance to that, which I talk about in other segments, but I do think that because I don't necessarily care about the nature of free will or sin, this concept that we are making choices for good or making choices for evil, I don't really get hung up on those, right? I just do my best and want to be loving and caring for the sake of being loving and caring, period. I think kind of having that awareness that we don't really get to choose our circumstances. We don't really get to choose the culture we're raised in. We don't really get to choose the God that we're preached to about. All of these different things result in me having more compassion for anyone's lived experience. And I did not really have that as a Christian, because the first thing that I thought about whenever I met someone who wasn't a Christian was, how can I get them saved? And I don't think that's a very respectful start to any kind of relationship. And the nature of wanting to save people is thinking that they are not good enough on their own, because that is what Christian salvation is. It's, you need to be redeemed. You need to be saved from hell, because otherwise you're just a sinner. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about what that conversation results in, okay? And so that's kind of like a disrespectful start, even if you're trying to do the mental gymnastics of getting back to, well, no, it's from a place of love. I don't want you to end up in hell. The fact that you think that people are going to end up in hell, unfortunately, is kind of a disrespectful start in the first place. And frankly, I'm sorry if you actually believe that hell is a real thing, because it means that you believe that you are not good enough and you are not valuable enough in your own right, and that you don't deserve peace and happiness or whatever, even in the afterlife, whether or not it's real. It means you don't think that you deserve that just by existing. And for that, I'm sorry for you. Okay, I'm going to read this next positive experience of atheism because I just really like what I wrote down earlier. So another one of the ways that identifying as an atheist has been so much better for my life is I have brought people to Christ as an evangelical, and I've helped people leaving the church who've already decided to, right? That's not me deconverting them. That's just kind of being aware that there are people out there leaving. That's why I do what I do, as I said earlier. And, it's not this deconversion mission that I'm on. I'm just here for the people who have already made their choices, because I know how difficult it can be to kind of lose a lot of that grounding. But the reverse is, I used to bring people to Christ for the sake of changing their mind. I've been there for people who have been harmed by religious trauma, right? And that's really meaningful and impactful to me. And I'm also loving participating in a more intentionally secular humanist society, which has brought more meaning and purpose to my life than proselytizing ever did, hands down. So this one really gets into the aspect of, I have found more meaning and purpose as an atheist than I ever did as a Christian. When I was bringing people to Christ, I felt like I was doing so on behalf of God because that's what him wanted. But now that I'm an atheist, I'm there for people who need me in any capacity because they deserve it on their own. I don't think that someone needs to deserve love and compassion and kindness no matter what they believe. That's something that I was not able to claim as a Christian, and I don't think a lot of Christians actually live like that. And there is this conversation. I think there are progressive Christians who do a lot of social justice work, and I stand by them in solidarity. I still kind of maintain my criticism of Christianity as an ideology because I think that's important as we move toward a more secular environment. That's part of the work of kind of growing up and evolving as a species. But I think part of that is recognizing that like nobody needs to be a certain kind of person to get help, validation, security, love, all of that, an eternity of bliss if you still have to believe in heaven and hell. I just think that's a bit problematic, to say the least. And I know that the Christian argument is that our life's purpose is only possible when God reveals it to us. That's what I used to believe. But I would ask them how that could possibly be the case for me, who has more purpose than ever before, even though I can't believe in he/him at all. This is really a big one for me because the meaning and purpose I derive from being an atheist and an outspoken one at that, and participating in these conversations and helping people find themselves after these really traumatic religious indoctrination experiences, I have never felt more purposeful. I have never been more compassionate. And none of this is because I'm being told by some creator being. Does that make sense? Like, I'm there for these people because they deserve it and I can help, period. That's it. If I were to go back to being a Christian today, God us forbid, but let's say I was, and I was out here proselytizing and trying to get people to convert to Christ, again, I still fall back on that is me trying to change someone's worldview, whereas now I'm just here for the people who are ready. That's way different. I'm just here for the people who are already kind of coming to terms with the lack of evidence, with the lack of compassion in the church culture, all of that. And I'm just not going to give this up. I'm not going to give that up so that I can go back to proselytizing and getting people to change their minds and fall in line. Yeah, miss me with that. Another way that my life has gotten better as an atheist, and this is an interesting one because up until even just a couple of months ago, I don't think I would have said this, but I have found a lot more meaningful community as an atheist. Now, this is a large part of what I think is really important for a lot of atheists and secular and non-religious kind of people and influencers and leaders to really focus on moving forward, because as we're breaking down these dogmas and people are leaving religion more than ever, up until a couple months ago, I would have been really concerned about the lack of a grounded community moving forward, because we're social creatures. If we don't have that, we're fucked. But what I have found, and I think this is truer now than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 75 years ago, as an atheist, there's still a lot of room for community. Again, decades ago, if you were an atheist, like in 1950s America, you would have been hard pressed to find a lot of different possibilities for meaningful community outside of the church. I would say that we've gotten a lot better. We still have a long way to go, but we've gotten a lot better about that now. Sports is a great example. I'm not a sports girl at all, but for example, in my personal life, I started doing stand-up comedy just to kind of meet people. I started doing stand-up comedy just to kind of meet other creative people and be part of the creative scene in Tulsa. And that was really impactful. And I made incredible friends who I'm still friends with to this day, even though I don't do stand-up comedy anymore. Don't ask. And so there are a lot of different kinds of social clubs or get-togethers, and online is kind of helping. It's also kind of isolating, so that one's tricky. But I do think that there are more avenues for interpersonal connection outside of religion than ever before. And simultaneously, I think that as an atheist creator, as kind of an outspoken atheist, I have found a lot of really powerful connections in specifically the atheist and secular movement that have brought a lot of meaning and purpose to my life that I really was looking for. And I have been so fortunate to kind of connect with these people. We're swapping interviews and podcasts and all of that stuff. And I've been really grateful for the position I'm in to kind of network with these people. And so it does kind of give me hope for the future. I think we still have a long way to go when it comes to actually rebuilding all of the things that traditional religion provided humanity in the past in such a way that doesn't bring the dogma with us, but still provides meaning and purpose and transcendence and awe and these things that are really actually a core part of humanity that unfortunately I think the atheist culture has not really gotten to yet. Now I say atheist culture, and full disclaimer, like, atheism is not a belief system. It is not an organized religion as much as Christianity would like to paint it as such. What I'm talking about when I say atheist community or atheist culture is really you get everyone in a room who identifies as an atheist. All the people who say I'm an atheist, get them in a room. Whatever kind of concepts or cultures or vibes that arise from that, that's what I mean by atheist culture. I do want to say that I still miss the community of Christians I was raised with because, as you can imagine, we were very, very close. I went to that private high school affiliated with the megachurch. I was really close with everyone I went to school with. My home life was a little bit difficult in high school, so I had that grounding of community whenever I went to school, whenever I went to church. And I honestly don't know if I would trade it for the world. I loved everyone I grew up with. I love them so much to this day. The way I left the church, kind of like right out of high school, was a lot more quickly and a lot more abruptly than anyone else in my friends kind of walked away from the church. And I think that really was jarring for a lot of them. And so there was a lot of ostracizing me right out the gate when I first deconverted and started deconstructing. And that was really painful for me. And interestingly, like, people have come back around 10 years later and have said, Kayse, you might have been right. I've also deconverted. I've also deconstructed XYZ. And I kind of like leave some space for that. And I'm really glad that people are finding their own authentic way, of course. But a part of me is still like really hurt by a lot of the ways that I was treated. Even proselytizing to me and trying to get me to go back to church, I found to be really disrespectful, even though I knew it was coming from a place of love because I had done the same thing in the past, right? It goes back to like, I know that Christians are trying to save us because they don't want us to go to hell. I still think that starts with the disrespect of thinking that you're not good enough for any kind of afterlife, whatever you want to call it, based on the fact that you're just alive and therefore deserve good things. So as much as I miss the community I was raised in, I don't think I'll ever be able to have that close connection with any of them again. There have been some people that I've talked to and had really positive conversations with concerning the people I was raised with, my fellow classmates and stuff. But yeah, I just don't think it'll ever go back to that nostalgic point, which I guess is just true of adulthood in general. Another really important way that I think my life has improved as an atheist, it has to do with the afterlife, because I can attest to the fact that believing in heaven and hell brought so much existential dread. And there actually are studies that show that a belief in a kind of like conditional afterlife brings a lot of consistent anxiety about the future and about the present. And so I don't really live with that anymore. And that is incredibly freeing. And I feel so much more present. And the reality is there might be an afterlife. I'm not opposed to this concept of us just like merging into the ether and the iteration of our consciousness changes. And I don't know. I kind of see it as like we just go back to what it was like before we were born, which we just don't have any evidence of. We don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. I'd love a good paradox. I'm not out here trying to make any claims. I don't need to. It could go black and I'm fine. But here's the reality. Here's what happens is we do a Pascal's wager. And Pascal's wager is, what if an atheist is wrong and it's actually accurate to believe in the Christian God and you're wrong your entire life and you're sent to Judgment Day? Would you really take the wager of gambling with your eternal soul, spending it in either heaven or hell? Would you really take that wager? And my response to that is always like, if you're telling me that the Christian God of the Old Testament, he, him pronouns, is real and has allowed all of this suffering, even though he was powerful and all-knowing and all of that, and I'm standing in front of that God, he, him, you're telling me that that is real. If I'm standing in front of him, I'd say send me straight to hell. I want nothing to do with you. If you had all of the power in the world to alleviate suffering, sending your son, Jesus Christ, to give people the option to avoid eternal suffering, not enough for me, Mr. All-Powerful, he, him. Not enough for me. Send me straight to hell. Number one. Number two, I like to flip Pascal's wager and ask, okay, what if I'm right? What if this is your only life and it fades to black afterwards? You're going to spend your entire life kind of hoping for something better. And I can attest to the fact that when you're living like that, you are not able to live as presently. You are constantly hoping and praying and believing that life will get better after you die. To me, that is heartbreaking, because one of the best things about being an atheist now is I consider every moment of my life to be incredibly precious. And I find the ability to get through anything I'm suffering because I know that I would rather be alive because I just don't know what's next. We don't have sufficient evidence for that. I think that near-death experiences are super powerful, and if they end up being really transformative in a positive way for the person involved, wonderful. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that people who experience NDEs end up a little bit less atheist, but the same thing can be true of a little bit less Christian, right? So I don't think that there's any evidence that results in a Christian version of heaven and hell at all. There's just not. If anything, there's some like white light, or, all-encompassing knowledge, intelligence, great. If that brings peace to you throughout the rest of your life after you come back from an NDE, I want to respect that. If that's transformative and powerful, so be it. I still think a subjective experience does not explain objective morality, number one. And number two, none of that really still affects the fact that we don't know what actually happens when you're gone, gone, gone. And I think that with that in mind, what I really have to ask here for people who believe in an afterlife is, how is it affecting the way you live your life now? Is it making you a better person? Is that what you need in order to practice love and kindness to your neighbor and all of that? Frankly, do you need a book to tell you all of these things? Because I think what I'm getting at here is, as an atheist, I don't need those things. I actually just think that we can be good people because we're good people. I actually think we can just care about our neighbor because we want the best for them. And I actually think that I don't care what happens after we die. I'm busy right now living my life. The last part of this conversation that I want to talk about is one of the best parts about being an atheist, which is also kind of one of the worst parts about being an atheist. Let me explain. So many people deconvert from Christianity or from high demand religions for totally valid reasons, for all different kinds of reasons. There is a large number of women who recognize the patriarchal aspect of Abrahamic religions such as Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and are finding a lot more freedom outside of those belief systems because Christianity is so inherently patriarchal. There's no way around it. There's no way of saying God the Father, Jesus the Son. There's no way of saying that Jesus is the masculine interpretation, the Holy Spirit is the feminine interpretation, and God is a non-binary interpretation, but I just use he, him pronouns because it's easier and I'm used to it. There's just no way that you can escape the patriarchal nature of a religion made by men and for men, because even in that weird genderification of the Holy Trinity, you're still resulting in some kind of worship as Jesus the man, as the most divine human being that's ever existed. Does that make sense? You're still putting a hierarchy on this one human being as the most divine and also masculine. So I think that whenever we're raising people in Sunday school and we're referring, I don't care what you negotiate behind the scenes here. Whenever you're calling the creator being of the universe, this divine source of all that is, whenever you're using he, him, ever, you are setting up a psychological aspect of those little kids to associate masculinity with divinity. I would be saying the same thing if the entire culture of the entire world was a she, her divine creator overlord instead. Okay, I don't think we'd have monotheistic religions. I don't think we'd have more hierarchical natures of these systems of belief, but it is what it is. My point is, patriarchy is built into Christianity. There's just no way around it. I'm not debating that right now. A lot of women who end up leaving that environment do so for a myriad of reasons, but the patriarchal aspect of that religion is a significant factor for most, if not all of us, right? Walking away from that. So one of the worst parts about when I started embracing my innate atheism, which is what I was born with, by the way, I realized, and kind of not just becoming an atheist, but an atheist content creator and kind of participating in the atheist scene and the atheist community and looking out to all of the major voices in the atheist community of people who identify as atheists and all of this stuff. Unfortunately, I was not able to escape patriarchy much at all, because the reality is the new atheist movement with these four white guys who kind of told everyone else what atheism means, like, it's still there. White supremacy and patriarchy are still built into atheism very, very significantly. And so that's one of the worst parts, is like, I thought I was escaping patriarchy, and male voices in the atheist space are just still so much more privileged with platforms and, you know, being taken seriously. I will say two things. It's not nearly as bad as it was in the Christian church, right? As far as like patriarchy. But more significantly, I think this is one of the best parts about becoming an atheist. The patriarchal notion of men being better than women, or women having to subjugate to men, whatever, is not built into atheism as a concept. Whereas, as I was talking about earlier, it is built into the concept of Christianity. And so now that I identify as an atheist instead of a Christian, that subjugation of women, that hierarchy of gender, okay, patriarchy is not something I'm consistently trying to justify, right? I'm not internalizing the belief that I am lesser than, such as I was when I was a Christian. And because of that, at the very least, patriarchy might still exist in the atheist community, but I am no longer holding myself back because of it and reinforcing it internally. Does that make sense? So as a Christian woman, I was constantly doing these mental gymnastics, even though I was out testing all of the boys in my class, graduated at the top of my class in this Bible-based private high school, and doing just intellectual laps around these boys. I'm so sorry, but like, I'm not sorry, right? It's like, even though I was doing all of that, I was still trying to convince myself that it's correct to submit to my husband and let them be the leaders, right? Like, that cognitive dissonance was always there, even when I was a Christian. And I really struggled with that. Of course, looking back, I can see it a lot more clearly. And I was constantly trying to hold myself back. And I was constantly trying to be more submissive and to be more feminine, and all of these different things that I just do not do as an atheist anymore, right? Like, at the very least, the beliefs that I hold now do not inherently hold myself back as a woman. And that is why becoming an atheist has been one of the best parts of my life, is because there are no internal beliefs that make me less than. And that is something that I want everyone to take away from this conversation. There is nothing inside of you that makes you less than anyone else. There's nothing inside of you that is broken and needs to be saved. There is nothing inside of you that is inherently evil, and therefore you need someone else to tell you that you're good enough, okay? You are good enough on your own. You are valid on your own. And I see you as a fellow human on this planet, and you matter to me no matter what you believe. And frankly, I just would not have been able to say that 15 years ago. So with that, thank you for being here. My name is Kayse Melone. Like and subscribe and all of the things. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just, hang out in the Kayse Melone world. I don't know. I appreciate you being here. And with that, I'll see you next time.